have breaking news coming out of Arizona. House Resolution 2016 passed 8-1 out of committee. That's right, 8-1. We're on the move in Arizona. Hi, this is Holly Robichaud with breaking news on term limits. We've got a lot of updates on what's happening in DC this week and throughout the states. We are working every day to make term limits happen. We have some great news coming out of DC this week. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, Representative Ralph Norman has filed House Joint Resolution 11. Well, this week we have 5 new co-sponsors. I'm proud to announce that Representative Mike Garcia, Scott Franklin, David Swikert, Byron Donalds, and Rick Allen have all joined our efforts. This brings our total up to 70 co-sponsors. That's right, 70. We have the momentum building. Up next, we'll be talking with Micah Beckwith. Micah is a rock star in Indiana politics. He is currently the pastor at Life Church, and he has over 17 years of experience in service in central Indiana, having pastored at multiple churches. He's also a small business owner with several companies, including a promotional production company and an entertainment group. In 2020, Micah ran for Congress. He is now currently serving as the director of the Indiana Family Institute Hoosiers Leadership Series, as well as executive director for the Indiana Family Action, which is dedicated to promoting elected conservative leaders. We are proud to have him as a member and our state chair for Indiana. Thank you, Micah, for joining us today. I'm so glad to have you on breaking news on term limits. And I just first wanted to start off with, so what motivates you in supporting term limits as much as you are?
Well, I think term limits there was an example set for us by President George Washington early on. I think he understood that it's hard to withstand the temptations of long-term power. There's a famous quote by George Washington that says, few men have the virtue to withstand the highest bidder. And he kind of set the standard. He said, after 2 terms, there were no presidential term limits. The 22nd Amendment hadn't been amended to the Constitution yet, and he just stepped down out of his own willingness after 2 terms, and he said, "Listen, it's not right for me to stay any longer. I'm going to go back to being a private citizen and pass the torch to someone else." And so I think he set the standard. And who do we think we are if we think we can stay in longer than a George Washington? I mean, he's one of the greatest, probably highest characters of virtue that our nation has ever seen, and yet we have people like the Steny Hoyers or the Dick Durbins or the Nancy Pelosi's or the Mitch McConnells who have been in there for decades. I mean, I don't even know if I was born when some of them went into power, which is sad. So I think term limits, one, it keeps us safe from the corruption of the heart. So it's kind of a wall and a guardrail. And then 2, it also allows for new, fresh ideas. And I think it just kind of continues to spur on new people getting into office, bringing their fresh perspective and their ideas, which I think is a good thing. I think it's healthy for our republic when we have those new ideas constantly coming into Washington.
Well, you've been traveling Indiana pretty aggressively talking about term limits. What are people saying in Indiana about term limits?
Well, it's a really easy topic to talk about. It's not divisive. It's not a politically contentious conversation when I bring it up. Most people like it. I would say even the farthest right and farthest left can come together on an issue like term limits, which I think is which is exciting to see. That I'll have some really big critics on the left who really don't like my politics, and they'll be very critical of me in almost every issue. But the moment we talk about term limits, you kind of see them soften. You say, you know what, I can get behind something like that. So I think it's a very popular idea from both the right and the left, and this kind of spans the partisanship, and it really kind of blows the ideas of left and right out of the water. I think most people say, no, term limits is a good, healthy thing that we should incorporate.
Well, I hear that down in Indiana, there's going to be quite the U.S. Senate race, and we've got Jim Banks, who is a sponsor of House Joint Resolution 11 by Ted Cruz, and he is making term limits a major portion of his race for the U.S. Senate. Do you think that's a winning strategy for him?
I do. I think, again, polls have shown that over 80% of Americans want term limits. I think when you're traveling, especially the Hoosier state, and you're saying, hey, this is an issue that Republicans and Democrats can get behind, I think it's a political win for anyone to run on term limits. And I think it's also a principled win. I think anyone who supports term limits really does believe that they're at least saying that we need to continue to move people in and out. It's a citizen legislature. You're only supposed to serve for a season and then pass the torch to someone else. And I think that resonates with Hoosiers all over the state. So I think for Jim, he's gonna have a winning message on the term limits issue pretty easily. It's not a that's kind of like that political, like grand slam. If you need to hit one out of the park with everyone you're talking to, talk about term limits. And I think that'll break down a lot of barriers, and people will say, you know what, I can listen. This guy seems like a rational guy, whether you're on the right or the left. So it's a great starting point for a lot of politicians when they're running for office to say, hey, term limits is where we need to go. I'll support those. And then they can dive into the other issues from there.
That sounds great. What do you think are the outlook is for passing term limits resolution in Indiana?
Well, I think it's good. I think most of our state reps and state senators will at least say that they're for it. And again, it's pretty easy to say that you're for it in Indiana or just in the state level because it doesn't term limit their office. So this is a resolution that would only term the Washington offices. So the representatives, U.S. representatives and U.S. senators. So it's kind of a whether they believe in it or not, most state reps and state senators will say, oh yeah, I'll get behind term limits because it doesn't really affect me at all. And it's kind of a political win. So I'll do it. So I don't know if they necessarily agree, in principle with term limits, but it's kind of a political, easy, a touchdown, if you will. And so I think there's good traction. Now, the question that I have, and I always ask them, is every legislative session, we are a part-time legislature here in Indiana. So we meet every year from January to around mid-March or beginning of April, depending on if it's a short session or a long session. And we always get, well, it didn't come up this year. We'll get it on next year. Like it's kind of this, we really like the idea.
Kicking the can down the road.
Kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
So, we just kind of have to hold their feet to the fire a little bit. If you're in Indiana watching this, just call your rep or your senator, your state senator, and say, hey, get behind this resolution to jump on with U.S. term limits.
All right. Well, Micah, we can't thank you enough for all the hard work you're doing in Indiana, and keep us posted.
Okay, I will. Thanks for all you guys do too. It's an honor to stand with you on this.
All right. Thank you for joining Breaking News on Term Limits today. Did you know the idea of term limits has been around since the 1800s? Abraham Lincoln was an advocate for it. He actually self-limited himself to one term in the House of Representatives. Don't forget, February 27th is National Term Limits Day. It's a day that we commemorate the ratification of the 22nd Amendment in 1951, which imposed term limits on the President of the United States. If it's good enough for the president, then term limits is good enough for Congress. Congressional term limits can become a reality. We have the momentum, but we can't do it without you. I urge you to go to termlimits.com to see how you can help in your state and nationally. Also, visit termlimits.com/store to get your t-shirts to show your support on Term Limits Day, February 27th. And be sure to share this program with your friends. This is Holly Robichaud with Breaking News on Term Limits. See you next week.